7 decades since the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, around 80 new fragments of the ancient texts have been revealed to the public.
They tried to erase this from history. They almost succeeded. A 2,000-year-old Bible was hidden for centuries, and when people finally read it, it destroyed everything they thought they knew about humanity. The church banned it. Governments buried it. And the ones who found it, they were never the same again.
This is a rare Ethiopian Orthodox Bible manuscript, handwritten in Ethiopia's sacred liturgical language, Ge'ez.
This ancient text reveals a secret so disturbing, so world-shattering, that the most powerful institutions in human history spent 2,000 years making sure you would never see it. So, why are you only hearing about this now? To understand why, you first need to understand what the Book of Enoch actually is, where it came from, and why so many people across so many centuries went to such lengths to either find it or bury it. The Book of Enoch is an ancient Jewish religious text attributed to Enoch, the great-grandfather of Noah. According to the traditional Bible, Enoch is listed as the 7th of the 10 pre-flood patriarchs in Adam's lineage, a relatively minor figure who is mentioned only briefly in the book of Genesis. Yet the text that carries his name is anything but minor. It is dense, strange, and in many places deeply unsettling. It covers the origins of evil, the nature of angels, the fate of humanity, and the mechanics of the cosmos, in a way that sits uncomfortably alongside the version of events most people were raised with. The book is technically classified as pseudepigrapha, which is a term used by scholars to describe ancient writings that claim a famous author who almost certainly did not write them. The idea behind this practice was straightforward. If you attached the name of a respected biblical figure to your text, it carried more weight, more authority. It was a common approach in the ancient world, and the Book of Enoch is one of the most well-known examples of it. The real author or authors remain unknown. What we do know is that the text was likely written over a long period of time, compiled from multiple sources, and that the earliest portions date back to somewhere around the 3rd century BC. The original manuscript disappeared around the end of the 4th century AD. For well over 1,000 years after that, the book existed only in fragments, pieces found in Greek, Latin, and Syriac translations scattered across different parts of the ancient world. Most of the early Christian churches had moved on. The Book of Enoch had been excluded from the biblical canon, dismissed by influential church figures as unreliable, and gradually faded from mainstream religious life. By the medieval period, most people in Europe had never heard of it. That changed in 1773 when a Scottish explorer named James Bruce returned from a years-long journey through northeastern Africa carrying 3 complete copies of the Book of Enoch, written in an ancient Ethiopian language called Ge'ez. The copies had been preserved by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which had never stopped treating the book as sacred scripture. Bruce had travelled through Abyssinia, the region we now know as Ethiopia, and had come back with something that the Western world had not seen in its complete form for over a millennium. Bruce was not a typical traveller. He was a scholar, an adventurer, and a man with a particular set of interests that went well beyond geography. Before his journey into Africa, he had served as the British consul in Algiers, where he spent several years studying antiquarian relics and ancient ruins. He was also a member of a Masonic lodge, specifically the Canongate Kilwinning Lodge in Edinburgh, and this membership appears to have played a significant role in shaping his motivations for the journey. Within certain Masonic traditions of the time, Enoch was a figure of considerable significance. Some Freemasons connected Enoch to the Egyptian god Thoth, who was associated with writing, knowledge, and the secrets of the universe. The belief held by some within these circles was that Enoch had been the original keeper of hidden knowledge that had been passed down through the ages and that Masons considered themselves the rightful inheritors of. Finding the complete text of the Book of Enoch would, in theory, validate that belief. It would be proof that the knowledge they had preserved was real and that its origins stretched all the way back to the earliest days of human history. What Bruce actually found was more complicated than that. The Book of Enoch did not simply confirm the myths he had hoped to validate. It told a story that raised far more questions than it answered, and those questions touched on some of the most sensitive points in Christian theology. The reaction from religious authorities was predictably cold. Bruce did not publish the copies he brought back during his lifetime. The book sat, largely ignored by mainstream scholarship, until an English translation was finally produced in 1821, nearly 50 years after Bruce's return. The discomfort surrounding the text was not hard to understand. The Book of Enoch presented a version of early human history that conflicted sharply with the account that had been handed down through centuries of Christian teaching. Its depiction of the origins of evil, in particular, challenged one of the core narratives of the faith in a way that few religious authorities were prepared to address publicly. The story of how the book survived is partly down to geography and partly down to the devotion of a religious community that the rest of the world had largely overlooked. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church, one of the oldest Christian institutions in existence, had kept the Book of Enoch as part of its canon for centuries. While European churches debated and ultimately rejected the text, the Ethiopian Church simply continued to treat it as scripture. When Bruce arrived in Abyssinia in 1770, he found not just the book itself, but a living tradition that had never let it go. The second major rediscovery of the book came nearly 2 centuries later under very different circumstances. In 1946 and 1947, a group of Bedouin boys tended their sheep near a series of caves in the Judean desert, close to the ancient settlement of Qumran on the northwest shore of the Dead Sea. One of the boys threw a rock into an opening in a cliff face and heard something shatter inside. When he and his companions went in to investigate, they found large clay jars containing leather and papyrus scrolls. The scrolls turned out to be over 2,000 years old, and among them were fragments of the Book of Enoch, fragments that helped scholars confirm the age and authenticity of the text in ways that had previously been impossible. These became known as the Dead Sea Scrolls, and their discovery sent ripples through the academic and religious world. The site at Qumran, it turned out, had been home to a Jewish community that held the Book of Enoch in particularly high regard. Multiple fragments from different sections of the text were found across the caves, suggesting that this community had not only read the book, but studied it seriously. The Qumran community, which most scholars identify with a sect known as the Essenes, held views that put them at odds with the mainstream religious establishment of their time. The Book of Enoch, with its unorthodox account of history and its deeply apocalyptic outlook, fit naturally into their way of thinking. The fact that the book survived at all, through centuries of suppression, through the collapse of ancient civilizations, through the loss of languages and the destruction of manuscripts, says something about the hold it has had on people across very different times and places. It was not kept alive by powerful institutions. It was kept alive by communities on the margins, by individuals who believed it contained something worth preserving, and occasionally by explorers who went looking for it at considerable personal risk. If the story of how the Book of Enoch was found reads like an adventure, the story of what is actually inside it reads like something else entirely. It is part religious text, part mythology, part ancient science, and part apocalyptic warning. It is not an easy read, and it was never meant to be. The people who wrote it were not trying to comfort their audience. They were trying to explain the world as they understood it, including the parts of it that were terrifying. The book is not a single continuous narrative. It is better understood as a collection of 5 separate texts that were compiled together over time, each with its own focus, its own tone, and its own set of concerns. Scholars refer to these 5 sections as the Book of the Watchers, the Book of Parables, the Astronomical Book, the Book of Dream Visions, and the Epistles of Enoch. Together they run to 100 chapters, and they cover everything from the origins of evil to the structure of the cosmos to the precise length of the solar year. The sheer range of the material is part of what makes it so unusual, and part of what has kept scholars, theologians, and curious readers returning to it for centuries. The section that tends to get the most attention, and the one that has filtered most deeply into popular culture, is the Book of the Watchers. This is the part of the text that deals with a group of angelic beings who abandon their posts in heaven and come down to earth, with consequences that ripple outward in ways nobody anticipated. The Watchers, as the text describes them, were a group of 200 angels whose original purpose was observation. They were assigned to watch over humanity, to monitor the development of the human race without interfering in it. The distinction matters because what happens next is defined entirely by the fact that they cross a line they were specifically told not to cross. According to the text, the daughters of men were beautiful, and the Watchers noticed. They held a council. among themselves and made a collective decision to descend to Earth and take human women as their wives. Their leader, a figure named Samjaza, raised concerns at the outset. He pointed out that what they were planning was a direct violation of their purpose, and that the consequences would fall on him most heavily. The others persuaded him that the responsibility would be shared equally, and so, together, they came down. What followed was a cascade of events that the text presents as the root cause of everything that went wrong with humanity. The women bore children to the Watchers, and those children were giants, referred to in the text as the Nephilim, a word that translates roughly as the fallen ones. The Nephilim are described as consuming everything around them. They ate through the food supply, then they started killing people, and when that was no longer enough, they turned on each other. Meanwhile, the Watchers were doing something arguably worse than fathering monsters. They were sharing knowledge with humanity that was never supposed to be shared. One of the Watchers, a figure named Azazel, taught men how to make weapons, swords and knives, the tools of warfare. He also taught them how to work with metals, how to use dyes and pigments, how to shape and alter the world around them. Other Watchers passed on knowledge of astronomy, astrology, and the natural sciences. The women were taught sorcery, incantations, and herbology. The text is clear about what it thinks of all this. This transfer of knowledge was not a gift, it was a corruption. Humanity was not ready for what it received, and the result was a rapid descent into violence, impiety, and chaos. The cries of the people eventually reached heaven, where 4 archangels, Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel, looked down at what was happening and brought it to God's attention. The archangels placed most of the blame on Azazel, describing him as the one who had disclosed the secrets of heaven to the world. They also named Samjaza, the leader of the Watchers, for his role in the whole affair. God's response was to send instructions to the archangels. Raphael was told to bind Azazel by hand and foot and cast him into darkness. Uriel was sent to find Noah and warn him that a flood was coming, telling him how to survive it. The Nephilim were to be destroyed, and the Watchers condemned to spend eternity as demons. The figure of Azazel deserves a moment of particular attention because he carries more weight in the text than a simple villain. He is described with goat-like features, and it is from this description that scholars believe we get the concept of the scapegoat, an idea that later appears in the Book of Leviticus, where a goat is symbolically loaded with the sins of the community and sent into the wilderness. The parallel is difficult to ignore. Azazel in the Book of Enoch is the one on whom all blame is ultimately placed, even though the Watchers acted collectively. He becomes the figure who absorbs the guilt of others, which is a function that carries enormous symbolic resonance in the wider religious tradition. The second major section, the Book of Parables, is distinct from the rest of the text in a number of ways. It is the only section of the Book of Enoch for which no fragments have been found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, which has led many scholars to argue that it was written later than the other sections, possibly somewhere between 50 and 200 AD. Others disagree, and the debate has not been settled. What the Book of Parables contains are 3 extended visions given to Enoch, not parables in the way most people understand the term, but large-scale prophetic visions dealing with judgment, the fate of the righteous, and the ultimate destiny of those who have turned away from God. The imagery is dense and often overwhelming. Enoch is swept up in a whirlwind and transported to heaven, where he sees the dwelling places of the righteous among the angels. He sees hundreds of thousands of angelic beings, too numerous to count, gathered around what the text calls the Lord of Spirits. He is shown the secrets of heaven, how kingdoms rise and fall, how human actions are weighed and measured, how the cosmos is ordered. One of the more contested aspects of the Book of Parables is its use of the phrase Son of Man. For a long time, translators and scholars interpreted this as a reference to Jesus Christ, which was used as evidence that the text was written after the birth of Christianity. A closer reading, however, suggests that the figure being described is Seth, the son of Adam and the patriarch of all humans who survived the flood. The Hebrew phrase that gets translated as Son of Man also means Son of Adam, which is precisely how Seth is introduced in the text. The Christian reading, according to a number of scholars, was not inherent in the original, but was introduced through the assumptions of the translators. The Some Astronomical Book is perhaps the most unexpected section of the text, at least for a modern reader. It is a detailed and methodical attempt to calculate the true length of the solar year using the movements of celestial bodies. The conclusion it reaches is that the year should be 364 days long, a position that put its authors at direct odds with the religious establishment, which used a 360-day calendar. This might seem like a dry, technical dispute, but in the ancient world it was anything but. The calendar determined when religious festivals were observed, including Passover. Getting the date wrong was not considered a minor administrative error, it was considered a sin. The community at Qumran, which preserved so many fragments of the Book of Enoch, used a 364-day calendar and was openly critical of the priestly authorities for using what they considered an incorrect one. The astronomical book's support for the 364-day year almost certainly contributed to its popularity among the Qumran community and helps explain why so many copies of the text were found in those caves. The Book of Dream Visions takes a different approach to history, retelling the story of the world through an extended allegory in which the major players, Israelites, Egyptians, Babylonians, and others, are represented as different animals. The Israelites appear as sheep, surrounded by wolves, dogs, lions, and eagles representing the various empires and peoples they encountered. It is an unusual literary choice, but it allowed the author to comment on political and historical events in a way that was both vivid and, crucially, somewhat harder for hostile authorities to pin down. The final section, the Epistles of Enoch, brings together a series of fragments that appear to have been appended from other sources. Among the most striking passages is the account of Noah's birth, which describes him as a child so unusual in appearance that his own father was unsettled by the sight of him. Noah is born with white skin and hair as red as a rose, with eyes that are said to have glowed like the sun. He speaks to God from the moment he is born. Lamech, his father, is so disturbed by this that he goes to his own father Methuselah for guidance, who in turn seeks out Enoch. Enoch explains that the child is not a sign of wrongdoing, but of something significant to come, and names him Noah. Taken together, these 5 sections form a text that is unlike almost anything else in the ancient religious canon. It is not tidy or consistent. It contains contradictions, repetitions, and passages that remain genuinely difficult to interpret. But it also contains a coherent and deeply felt attempt to explain the origins of evil, the structure of the universe, and the relationship between the divine and the human, in terms that the people who wrote it believed were true, and that the people who suppressed it clearly found threatening enough to act against. The Book of Enoch did not become a mainstream topic of conversation because academics decided it was time to revisit ancient Jewish pseudepigrapha. It broke into popular culture the way most things do these days, through persistent, passionate people who refuse to let it stay buried, and through platforms large enough to carry that conversation to millions of listeners at once. For a text that spent centuries being actively suppressed, ignored, or dismissed as irrelevant, the Book of Enoch has had a remarkable resurgence. It is discussed in university lecture halls, debated in online forums, referenced in documentaries, and has become a recurring subject on some of the most widely listened to podcasts in the world. The questions it raises about the origins of evil, the nature of divine authority, the source of human knowledge, and the relationship between the earthly and the supernatural have not lost any of their edge with age. If anything, they feel more urgent now than they did when the book was first rediscovered. Much of the credit for bringing the Book of Enoch to a modern mainstream audience belongs to figures outside the traditional academic establishment. Joe Rogan is probably the most prominent example. Over the course of numerous episodes of his podcast, Rogan has returned to the Book of Enoch repeatedly, discussing it with scientists, historians, archaeologists, and independent researchers. His interest in the text is genuine and long-standing, and his platform is one of the largest in the world, reaching tens of millions of people per episode. When Rogan talks about something, people listen, and a significant number of those people go looking for more information afterward. Rogan's central argument about the Book of Enoch is not a theological one. He is not making a case for the literal truth of its contents, or arguing that it should be reinstated into the biblical canon. His position is more pointed than that. He argues that the book was removed from mainstream religious tradition not because it was false or poorly written, but because it was politically inconvenient. The knowledge it contained and the version of history it presented posed a direct challenge to the authority of the institutions that controlled religious life in the ancient world. Getting rid of it was not a spiritual decision, it was a power move. This argument resonates with a lot of people, and it is not difficult to understand why. The history of the biblical canon is, among other things, a history of decisions made by specific groups of people with specific interests. The texts that made it into the Bible were chosen by councils and authorities who had their own theological, political, and cultural priorities. The texts that did not make it in, and there were many, were not all excluded because they were considered spiritually worthless. Some were excluded precisely because they were considered dangerous. The Book of Enoch fits that description in a way that is hard to argue with. The version of events presented in the Book of Enoch undermines one of the most fundamental narratives in Western religious tradition: the idea that human suffering, violence, and moral failure are the result of human weakness and sin. The Book of Enoch tells a different story. In that story, much of what went wrong with humanity was not humanity's fault. It was the result of outside interference, of beings with far greater knowledge and power who came down and disrupted the natural order of things. The knowledge that led to warfare, to social inequality, to the manipulation of the natural world. In the Book of Enoch, that knowledge was given to humanity, not developed by it. The implications of that version of history are significant, and they are not comfortable for any tradition that places human sin at the center of its theological framework. This is one of the reasons the book has attracted serious attention from researchers working in fields well outside traditional religious studies. The description of the Watchers, powerful beings who descended from the sky, interfered with human development, shared advanced knowledge, and produced hybrid offspring, has been picked up by writers and researchers interested in the possibility of ancient contact with non-human intelligence. Rogan himself has explored this angle on multiple occasions, drawing a direct line between the Watchers of the Book of Enoch and modern discussions about unidentified aerial phenomena and the possibility of extraterrestrial influence on early human civilization. This is a contested interpretation, and it is worth being clear about that. Mainstream scholars do not support the idea that the Watchers should be read as a literal account of alien visitation. The academic consensus is that the Watchers represent a mythological framework for explaining the origins of evil and the introduction of forbidden knowledge into human society, a story that served a specific theological and cultural purpose for the communities that told it. But the fact that the text lends itself to multiple interpretations, including ones that sit well outside conventional religious thought, is part of what has kept it alive and relevant across such a long stretch of time. The Book of Enoch has also become a significant point of reference in conversations about race and representation within religious history, a dimension of the discussion that has grown considerably in recent years. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church's preservation of the text is central to this conversation. While European Christianity was rejecting the Book of Enoch and pushing it to the margins, an African Christian community was treating it as sacred scripture and keeping it alive. The book survived not because of the institutions that dominated Western religious life, but in spite of them. And it survived specifically because of the dedication of a community that those same institutions largely overlooked. This fact carries weight in discussions about whose voices and whose traditions have been centered in the construction of mainstream religious narratives and whose have been pushed aside. Commentators have pointed out that the Book of Enoch's exclusion from the biblical canon and the subsequent centuries during which it was effectively invisible to most of the Western world is part of a broader pattern in which the contributions of African and Middle Eastern communities to the development of religious thought have been systematically undervalued. The description of Noah in the epistles of Enoch has added another layer to this conversation. The text describes Noah as being born with white skin and hair the color of a rose, with eyes that glowed like the sun, a physical description that is entirely absent from the canonical Bible. The passage notes that this appearance was so unusual that his own father was unsettled by it. For some commentators, the significance of this detail lies in what it implies about the people who surrounded Noah, that his unusual appearance was remarkable precisely because it was so different from those around him, suggesting that the population of that time and place was not predominantly light-skinned. This is a reading that has sparked genuine debate, and it is not universally accepted, but it illustrates the extent to which the Book of Enoch continues to surface in discussions that go far beyond the purely theological. What is perhaps most striking about the modern reception of the Book of Enoch is the sheer diversity of the people engaging with it. It draws in biblical scholars and archaeologists, yes, but also people interested in ancient history, in mythology, in cosmology, in questions about the origins of human civilization, and in broader philosophical questions about the nature of knowledge and who gets to control access to it. It has found an audience among people who are deeply religious and among people who have no religious faith at all. It resonates across those boundaries in a way that very few ancient texts manage. Part of the reason for that is the nature of the questions it raises. The Book of Enoch is not primarily a book about doctrine. It is a book about power, about who holds it, how it is used, and what happens when it falls into the wrong hands. It is about knowledge and whether certain knowledge is inherently dangerous. It is about the relationship between the powerful and the powerless, between the divine and the human, between order and chaos. These are not questions that belong to one religion or one culture. They are questions that every human society has had to grapple with, and they are questions that remain as relevant and as unresolved today as they were 2,000 years ago. The institutional response to the book has also shifted, if only slightly. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church has always maintained the Book of Enoch as part of its canon and has never needed to revise that position. Among Western scholars, the text is now taken seriously as a historical and literary document, even by those who do not consider it spiritually authoritative. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls fragments did a great deal to legitimize academic interest in the text, providing physical evidence of its age and demonstrating the extent to which it was valued by at least one significant ancient Jewish community. What has not changed is the fundamental tension at the heart of the book's history. The Book of Enoch presents a version of events that the dominant religious institutions of the Western world found uncomfortable enough to exclude, suppress, and eventually lose for over 1,000 years. Its rediscovery did not resolve that tension. It brought it back into view and left it sitting there, unresolved, unignorable, and still producing arguments among scholars, theologians, podcasters, and ordinary people trying to make sense of where we came from and who has been deciding what we are allowed to know about it. The book that shook the foundations of the early church has not stopped shaking things. It has simply found a new and much larger audience.